Hello and welcome to Science Minds. I'm your host, Olivia Surgent. Today we're joined by Dr. Patrick Dwyer, who was formerly a graduate student at UC Davis and is now a research fellow at Trobe University in Australia. Patrick, welcome. We're so excited to have you.
Oh no, thank you for inviting me to come back. It's great to be back, see people, see one of my two former mentors who went on a trip up from the Bay Area. Yeah, no, it's great.
That's amazing. Yeah, in many ways, it's kind of a welcome home, right? Mm-hmm. With a new title, new knowledge. It's good.
Yeah, everything seems very similar, except there's a lot more parking space.
That is a good thing. We needed more of that. I love it. Well, I'd love to start today by just getting a sense of the type of research that you do, the questions you like to ask, how you like to go about answering them.
Yeah, no, it's a great question and slightly difficult to answer because I'm a very distractible person. My core research focus, though, is probably on sensory experiences and just understanding the sensory experiences of autistic people, because this is an experience that's quite different from what most people experience with sensory stimulation, and it's actually kind of hard to find just the words and the concepts to understand this in sort of the general English language. So part of what the autistic community has been trying to do is make sense of these experiences, and I'm trying to do my own bit by looking at some of the different experiences. Right now I'm actually hearing some of the background noise, and it's interesting because those are exactly the sorts of experiences that I'm interested in. And through that understanding of the attention, the sensory, how the attention is related to the sensory, is how you experience and attend to the world around you. It kind of does determine what goes into your conscious experience, and that's sort of where maybe some of the sensory is coming from, and that's what some of my research has suggested. So that's very much of interest to me. But I have all these other things that I get interested in as well that I think are important or interesting. So for example, I've gone quite interested in the accessibility of autism supports to people in the community, whether the autism supports we're providing are what the community wants and needs. Things like some of the controversies around the use of language in autism, more inclusive scientific research and collaborating with the community in research, all sorts of things.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like a very broad array of different interests and kind of research experiences, but I also imagine they kind of tie together, right? All towards like understanding the building blocks of kind of your experience, right? And then how to improve quality of life, how to improve, right?
Yeah, ultimately, I do feel that, the research should, of course, be trying to, promote, the well-being of autistic people, as well as, the broader autism community, family members, even if they're not autistic. That does hopefully tie together the various things that I do, because I would like to think that they will hopefully have some effects either immediately or ultimately towards that.
Certainly. How did you become interested in this kind of to begin with? If we reflect on your scientific journey, I would love to hear more about the turning points.
Well, I guess probably a big part of it might be when I was 11 and diagnosed as autistic. It's part of that. Of course, that being autistic does give me that personal connection, but it's more than that, because growing up as part of the autistic community, part of the broader autism community, of course, I'm meeting other people who are autistic, other people who are neurodivergent and in various situations, often encountering various sorts of difficulties and roadblocks and barriers and challenges because of that. And naturally, that leads to a desire to want to improve things. And I guess I felt that because of my own, personality and interests, that research might be a particularly conducive way for me to contribute towards that objective. So that's what I've been trying to do.
You are part of this kind of growing group of autism researchers who are autistic themselves, right? And I'm so curious about how perhaps that lived experience resonates or helps you to differently connect with perhaps your research participants or differently design your research studies.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and also the question like what is lived experience as well, because there's a few different things there. There's like the personal experience of being autistic, and maybe I have some personal insight into some of the sensory things, like you saw earlier, that some of the background stimulation was a bit disrupting my ability to think in that moment. My sensory coping resources are a heck of a lot better now than they used to be, but there is still that personal insight. But there's also the lived expertise of you're a part of this community, you have this sort of insider understanding of where other people in this community are coming from. It's a distinct community of people with its own, concepts and history, and just a whole, yeah. And if you're part of that community, not only might you hopefully have a bit more trust from that community, but you might have a better ability to sort of connect with people and understand where they're coming from. So I think there's multiple senses there. Of course, it's not exactly the same being an autistic researcher and academic versus an autistic person in the community. As you get into the research field, you sort of start to think less in terms of, here's the most important question, and what's the question that we can look at easily with the methods and technologies and resources available to us. There's this little comic strip I like to think about sometimes in relation to this. The comic is, there's a person who is looking around on the street for something that they've dropped, like some money or something. And somebody comes up to them and is asking what they're doing. And the person's saying, well, yeah, I'm looking for the money. And the person asks, oh, so you dropped it here? And the person says, no, I dropped it back there. And the person is like, well, why are you looking here? Because this is where the light is. I feel like the further you get into the research field, the more you look where the light is, and the less you look where the actual interesting things are, even if they're a bit harder to get to. So this is why collaborating with people in the community who don't have that researcher bias is also important. It does add time, and I don't always do it as much as ideally I should, but I do try to also be collaborating with autistic people out in the community.
Yes. Oh, I love that idea of perhaps looking where the light isn't, right? Or how can we shine new lights, right, in new places that are perhaps more important or more relevant? Do you have thoughts on that? Like, what are some places that perhaps we should be shining a light that we're not?
It's a good question, and I think there's actually a lot of exercises that are trying to address this through priority setting. So for example, in Australia, I sit on this committee, the Australasian Autism Research Council. And the job of this committee is to say, well, these are our priorities for autism research based on, consultation with the community and carefully gathering actually quite a lot of information from the community. And, through that, we've identified other people. This was before I joined the committee, actually, so perhaps that we was a bit arrogant. 10 different research priorities for things that are understudied, one of which actually I'll sort of be touching on later in the talk I'm giving, which is the sort of sensory built environment. We do a lot of studying the autistic person's sensory processing, relatively little looking at the accessibility of the built environments around autistic people, which I've dabbled a little bit in, I hope, in some of the things I'll be talking about later. But even those priority setting exercises leave gaps because we've realized that there's some important communities that may have their own important priorities. First Nations Australians, culturally and linguistically diverse people in Australia, and so we are actually commissioning some, further exercises, or hoping to commission some further exercises to look more specifically at what the priorities might be for some of these populations. So we still have work to do in terms of even identifying what the important priorities are, let alone actually addressing them.
Sure, but that makes so much sense, right? These different communities, right, have different needs perhaps, or different goals, and identifying those goals is the first step towards meeting them.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that sounds like really, really important work. I'd love to circle back around to the designing, sensory spaces, right? And I'm curious about perhaps what you've learned from that endeavor, or if there's something perhaps you would just like others to know about that, like the sensory experience piece of things.
Yeah, it's a great question, and what I am going to be talking about later is pretty specific. It's just using sort of an experience sampling method to get information from people about their sensory experiences as they're going through their lived environments, as opposed to, in a abstracted, decontextualized reflection on their own personal sensory processing profile, divorced from the actual environments in which they live. But if I had to give a sort of general statement or reflection, it's just that I am so glad that there is starting to be some greater attention to actually including autistic people in design. There's actually some really cool design standards for neurodiversity coming out of the UK, which I highly recommend that anybody who is, say, designing a building should have a look at, because there's a lot of really great points to think about there. And it is important, I think, to be mindful, though, because if people are going to try and do something for neurodiversity, that really it is important to consult, because sometimes you do get situations where people are like, well, we want to do something, but they haven't sort of done their homework, and what they end up doing isn't quite calibrated to the needs of the community. Like they decide, well, we're going to create a sensory room, but they don't tell people how to find the sensory room very easily. There's not that signage, and then if you're in a sensory overwhelmed state and you're trying to figure out where the heck is the sensory room, you may not even know it's there. Just knowing that the sensory room is there is actually crucial, because then that provides that reassurance that you can get to it. It removes a lot of the anxiety and vigilance that would otherwise be going on as you're worrying about whether you will have a sensory meltdown and be unable to sort of find somewhere to cope in the moment. It actually may sort of ironically create a situation where the sensory room isn't needed because people are able to participate more without it. But if you don't know the sensory room is there, or you can't find it, then you don't get any of that benefit. So I think, yeah, just being really mindful, but I do think there's a heck of a lot that we could be doing. Somebody was recently talking to me about smoking and how not all that long ago, it was very common for people to be smoking indoors and creating these really unpleasant environments for a lot of people, and we stopped doing that. Why can we not do something similar in regard to some of the sensory needs of neurodivergent people?
Yeah, I love that. I think that is an excellent point. As you were describing that kind of the need for more communication around the what would actually be helpful, right, in creating these neurodiversity affirming spaces, it really reminded me a lot of the work that you've done around the neurodiversity movement, right? And I'm curious if you have any kind of like big tips for others who might be less familiar with the concept of neurodiversity, but who are looking to create more neurodiversity affirming spaces. What are some kind of small things, perhaps, that people can do?
Well, I think the most important was actually sort of what we were just talking about, is actually listening to neurodivergent people, reaching out to neurodivergent people, approaching with an open, flexible mind. Autistic people get a heck of a lot of flack sometimes for being rigid and inflexible, we are told, but I I do see that at times, yes, you know, and partly that's because we're trying to cope with these environments that aren't set up for us, and that is difficult, and maybe, you know, trying to take control of those environments in ways that, you know, can be experienced as overly rigid is one part of that. But my experience of autistic communities, for example, is very much that they are open, they are flexible, people sort of do their own thing and other people do their own things, and everybody, you know, coexists in a judgment sort of free area. And I feel like that whole ethos, that whole approach to the world would actually be really beneficial if everybody just sort of you know, adopted that. And I feel like that would actually be immeasurably helpful for neurodiversity inclusion. There's also just a lot of misunderstandings about the neurodiversity movement and what it stands for, what we stand for, what we believe in. I feel like a lot of people think that we are somehow denying the reality of disability or the reality of the often quite extensive support needs that neurodivergent people have. And certainly that's not what I'm doing, not what, you know, any of the neurodiversity advocacy leaders that I know are doing. Really what we are trying to do is say, no, yeah, the disabilities, they're real. Some of that, you know, may come from individual differences. Some of that comes from the way that society responds to those and how, you know, accommodating and inclusive and accessible society is or is not. But the support needs, the disability, they're very real. The difference is that we're saying we shouldn't be discriminating against people because of that. We shouldn't be judging people because of that. We shouldn't be saying that there's something fundamentally wrong with people because of that, because of how they think. We're saying that people should always be able to feel accepted and valued for who they are.
Well, I cannot imagine a better note to end that on. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Dwyer. It's been wonderful.
No, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. This has been another episode of Science Minds. We'll see you next time.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.